Welcome to The Explainer. You ever look at the news from Washington, D.C. and just see constant friction, constant conflict, and think, man, this system is broken? Well, what if I told you that all that struggle is exactly how it was designed to work? Today, we're jumping right into that perpetual tug of war for power in the U.S. government, and you'll see why the founders might look at today's political gridlock and think, yep, that's a feature, not a bug.
So, to really get this, you have to start with the one thing that terrified America's founders more than anything else: concentrated power. For them, like James Madison wrote here, putting all the power in one place wasn't just a bad idea, that was tyranny, period.
So what was their solution? It wasn't just to neatly separate the government into three different branches. No, they went a step further. They built a system that was intentionally designed for conflict, a system where power was spread out among competing groups that would always be checking each other's ambition. Okay, let's dive into how they did it.
First up, we've got the branch the framers actually expected to be the most powerful of all, the U.S. Congress. And they gave it a pretty formidable set of tools to keep everyone else in line.
And just look at the arsenal Congress has at its disposal. For starters, they've got oversight, which means they can investigate pretty much anything the executive branch does. Then there's advice and consent. That's the Senate's power to approve or reject treaties and all major presidential appointments, from cabinet members to Supreme Court justices. And then, of course, they have the ultimate weapon.
And that weapon is impeachment. Now, it's a two-step process, and it's really important to remember it's more of a political process than a legal one. First, the House of Representatives acts kind of like a grand jury. They vote on whether to formally accuse or impeach an official. If a simple majority says yes, the whole thing moves over to the Senate, which then holds a trial. But, and this is a big but, to actually convict and remove someone from office, you need a 2/3 supermajority. That's a really high bar.
And this picture, wow, it just captures how incredibly serious and dramatic this whole process can be. What you're looking at is the moment in 1868 when the House's Sergeant-at-Arms is standing in the White House, serving President Andrew Johnson with the official summons for his impeachment trial. This wasn't just some formal procedure. This was a constitutional crisis playing out in real time.
But for all its power, impeachment is an incredibly difficult tool to actually use successfully. I mean, think about it. While 3 presidents have been impeached by the House, Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump, the number convicted by the Senate and removed from office is 0. Not a single one. That 2/3 vote is an incredibly effective shield for the presidency.
But hey, this tug of war is a two-way street. The president is not just sitting back and taking it. The executive branch has its own powerful arsenal of countermoves to push right back against Congress.
Just look at this number, 635. That's how many times President Franklin D. Roosevelt used his veto power. It's a pretty stark reminder that a president can single-handedly stop any bill dead in its tracks. Now, Congress can override a veto, but it takes that same 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. And just like with impeachment, that's a massive hurdle. It's a safeguard, for sure, but it can also be a perfect recipe for political stalemate.
When it comes to foreign policy, presidents have another trick up their sleeve to get around the Senate. You see, formal treaties need that 2/3 advice and consent vote, but presidents can use something called an executive agreement instead. It's basically a deal made directly between leaders, and get this, it doesn't need any Senate approval at all. That gives the president a ton of freedom on the world stage.
And here's a more modern tactic: the signing statement. So when a president signs a bill into law, they can attach this little note that basically says, okay, I'm signing this, but here's how my administration is going to interpret and enforce it. The practice really took off with President Reagan, and it's a clever way for the executive branch to try and shape how a law actually works in the real world, even if Congress meant something totally different.
All right, finally, let's get to the third branch in this constant tug of war, the judiciary. Now, this is the branch the founders probably thought would be the weakest, but over time, it developed one of the most powerful, game-changing moves in the whole system.
I mean, if you actually go and read Article 3 of the Constitution, which sets up the judiciary, it's shockingly short and vague. It basically just says, there will be a Supreme Court, and then tells Congress, you guys figure out all the lower courts. The founders left a lot of open questions about how much power the courts would really have.
And here's the kicker. The Supreme Court's biggest power, what we call judicial review, isn't even written down in the Constitution, not a word. This is the power to look at a law passed by Congress or an action by the president and say, nope, that's unconstitutional, and just strike it down. The court basically asserted this power for itself, and in doing so, it completely changed the balance of power forever.
Now, this power didn't just appear overnight. It grew through these huge moments in history. It all started in 1803 with the landmark case Marbury v. Madison, where Chief Justice John Marshall first laid out the principle. Then the court used it in the infamous Dred Scott decision to strike down a major act of Congress. And the whole thing really came to a head in the 1930s, when the court went head-to-head with President Roosevelt, striking down key parts of his New Deal and sparking a massive crisis over the role of government.
So, what do you get when you have these three powerful branches, each with its own arsenal, constantly pushing and pulling against each other? What's the end result of this never-ending, intentionally designed power struggle?
Well, a lot of the time, the result is something we call divided government. And you know exactly what this looks like, right? It's when the president is from one party and the opposition party controls the House or the Senate or both. It's a setup that pretty much guarantees friction and makes passing big, sweeping laws incredibly difficult.
And this isn't some rare thing either. It's become the new normal. If you look at the data from 1832 all the way to 2008, you see that elections resulted in a divided government almost 40% of the time. So that feeling of political gridlock you get from the news, yeah, it's not just in your head. It's a very real, very frequent state of affairs.
But this is what brings us back to the big idea. What if that gridlock isn't a sign that the system is broken? What if it's actually proof that the system is working exactly as it was meant to? The framers didn't see all that friction as a bug that needed to be fixed. For them, it was an essential feature, a built-in brake on the accumulation of power.
Think about it. All the arguments, the delays, the messy compromises, the gridlock. It's all a byproduct of a system that was designed to be slow and deliberative on purpose. The goal was to force people to talk and to compromise, to prevent any one branch or any one group from gaining too much power too quickly. Because they believed that was the only way to protect the ultimate prize, individual liberty.
So the next time you see the political world tied up in knots and Washington seems paralyzed, maybe you'll see it through a new lens. Not as a messy breakdown, but as the machine working just as it was designed. Which leaves us with a huge critical question for our modern world. In an age that seems to demand fast, decisive action, is a government built for friction still the best way to run a country and protect our freedom?